want to just go over a few shortcuts because we are going to have a Q&A with our guests this afternoon. So if you would like to mute or unmute your audio during the Q&A, that's Alt-A if you're using Windows and Command-Shift-A if you're using a Mac. And to raise or lower your hand, it's Alt-Y if you're using Windows and Option-Y if you're using a Mac. And if you're on the touch tone phone with us, that's *6 will unmute and mute, and *9 will raise your hands. And just as a reminder for guests who are joining us that don't identify with being blind or partially sighted, you are most welcome in this VocalEye space, but we will likely put the word guest behind your name just so I can tell the difference between who's a member of the blind community and who's joining us as our sighted allies. So please honor the change that we've made to your name. And then just to wish anybody who identifies with today as being Mother's Day, whether, as Louise pointed out, you are the mother of a four-legged companion in your home, or a pet, or a human, or are just a mother ambassador to people in your lives, you are all welcome and honored in this space. And men get to be our allies today. So thanks everybody for joining us. A reminder to folks as well that we are recording today's event for our friends who were unable to make it today, but we are going to be recording this event. So with the housekeeping sort of set to the side, I would like to officially welcome and acknowledge you all, and to acknowledge that VocalEye is broadcasting to you today from the unceded, ancestral, and occupied territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh people. And as we are all joining through this magic of Zoom today, I think that it's important for us all to take the time to acknowledge the lands that each of us are settled on. And I've done a little bit of that today by just walking around in my yard and spending time with the beautiful plants that are coming up and just acknowledging my relationship with Mother Earth and those who have so gratefully taken care of this land before I was an uninvited guest. So when you have the opportunity to do that in your own lives, please do so. I'm Amy, for those of you who don't know me. I am the Community Outreach Coordinator for VocalEye. And my notes say it's a Wednesday, but it's not. We're usually here on a Wednesday, but today is Mother's Day. It is a Sunday. It is May the 9th. And we are all gathered today for the almost live virtual VocalEye number 4444 for this Mother's Day special matinee. We're calling this My Mother's Story. And so this afternoon, we're going to share with you 4 stories, all told by our readers, and some of them are reading stories of their own mothers, and some of them are reading on behalf of other people's stories. So without any sort of further ado, I want to bring in our special guest, who is, I guess, the founder and creator of this whole My Mother's Story journey, Marilyn Norry. Welcome.
Hi, thanks, Amy.
How are you, Marilyn?
I'm good.
I wish you a happy Mother's Day, whatever that means to you.
It means many things. Oh my goodness, since I've been doing this project now, I call myself the mother of mothers, which sounds a bit grand, but there you go.
Well, I think grand or not grand, I think if given the project that we're talking about, it's totally warranted. And just, you know what, I forgot to mention one thing, Marilyn. I'm just going to invite this in the room before we get started, which is oftentimes folks hear me talk about the fact that VocalEye is receiving donations because this programming is free. But today in the chat is going to be a donation link for our friends in India who need some support right now. And so if anybody feels like making a contribution, we invite you to click the link in the chat and help out our friends in Mother India, right? So thank you for making that consideration. Okay, Marilyn, back to you. Sorry for the interruption. So okay. Tell us, you're here on Mother's Day. We're presenting My Mother's Story. Tell us what this project was all about for you.
Well, this is a project I started in 2004. I am an actor in Vancouver, and I was really bored and frustrated with all of the roles that I was reading for and watching on television and movies and on the plays too, as I worked as a story editor and a dramaturg with playwrights and screenwriters on their scripts. And it just seemed like the women that were being presented there were quite simple, quite boring, and not many, and I wanted more work. So I asked my friends, other women actors in Vancouver, to write the story of their mothers' lives, just the facts, where they came from, what happened, and things like that. And I thought maybe everybody was going to have the same kind of story as my mother, because we're all in the same work or something. No, not at all. Not at all. The stories that came in were from all over the world, because Vancouver is quite a diverse community. And what we realized, I had originally said, okay, we'll make a book or something. These stories were so captivating. They were the best theater I had ever heard. And so we said, oh, well, we'll have to put on a show. So we did that. And we did 9 different, this is working with Jen Griffin, who's a wonderful playwright and also part of our group. And we did 9 different stage shows of people reading their stories, but we collaged all the stories together. And that, the last one we did, we were commissioned by the theater in North Vancouver to create a show from that for them. And I did workshops all over North Vancouver and got more stories. We did publish the book. We published the originals, which is the first stories that the actors wrote. And then we published My Mother's Story, North Vancouver. And so it's expanding. We've got a website, an archive of women's stories that have been written all over the world. I have to say, you know, the stories that are being presented on film and television now are there's so much more diversity now than there was in 2004. It's quite incredible to realize that. So what I've been pushing for now in these workshops is, because there's a great value for individuals to continue to write their mother's story. And that's what we're doing workshops all over the place. And we're going to be doing a workshop with VocalEye in the fall.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit, Marilyn. So thanks for seeding the pathway, we'll call it.
Okay.
I'm such a metaphor person, and sometimes they come quickly to me, and sometimes I have to search for metaphor. But I think given the day, the planting of flowers analogy works. You've planted the seed, and on this trail. So, you know, you sort of shared with us a little bit about these stories, and I'm going to introduce the readers in just a moment. But you were talking about the framework, and it's different than maybe folks might be used to a traditional storytelling format.
It is.
So how is it different?
Well, I've discovered when I first created this, I saw that this was like a character arc, which is something that we use in dramatic writing. When we take one character from a play or a script, and we just track what happens, what they do, and how that works out to see if their journey is complete or if there's gaps and things like that. The writing recipe that we use, and I could have called it a template or an algorithm, but you know, it's our mums, so I call it a recipe, is to write the facts of your mother's life, just the facts. It's not about your relationship or any of your opinions about her. The facts of your mother's life from beginning to end, where you are just a footnote and in less than 2,000 words. So all of the stories that we have follow that format. And what I've discovered through workshops is that people who are writing memoir, or they're writing exercises, have found this to be a really valuable exercise, because it gets them out of the way of a good story. And we so often, when we're writing about our mothers especially, we want to filter it through our feelings and our opinions. And in this way, we are just witnesses. But women's history is getting written. And that's the thing that is the most valuable thing now, because it's not been written. And these are the stories that people share with their families, they share with their community. And you can figure out, when you write it down, you could figure out how to write the most difficult story. And it gets done.
That. Yeah. And you know, I just, before we bring in our readers, to acknowledge that we have 4 women joining us today in honor of Mother's Day, but you don't have to be a woman or female presenting or identify as female to write. Anybody can write, because you were saying to me, everybody has a mother.
That's it.
And so tell us a little bit about those kinds of, I guess maybe the kinds of people who have told stories about their mothers through the project already.
Our archive has about 130 stories in it so far, and there's men and women have written, and there are People have written about their birth mom and their adopted mom, and they have written about people who looked after them. And one of the great fun things that we've got as well is siblings, each writing their own story, because of course siblings have a very different idea about what was the most important thing that you could say. 2,000 words, you can't do a whole life. So you have to choose what stories you want to put in, and siblings put in very different stories, and it's quite interesting to find out.
That's an interesting journey of a family's matriarch, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I like
The
that.
stories come from all over the world. So like we have the stories from here, and it's a funny thing because everybody thinks that, I don't know, that other people have the same kind of, their mom was like mine, oh, she was just a mom, or so, whatever it is that we say. But really, this is the history of the 20th century through women's eyes of what were they doing.
Well, this I'll tell you just from my own perspective. So last Mother's Day, obviously we were in the midst of a pandemic, just like we are now. And so I didn't go buy my mother any fancy gifts. She knew it. But I wrote her a poem. And I wrote her a poem about the strength of my mother during COVID, because it was real in my life. And this year I wrote my mother another poem, but this time I wrote it about my mother as a woman before she was a mother. Right. And knowing that I see her as a woman, even though she's my mother, I also see her as the woman that she is, and the woman that she has grown to be in her life, separate from being a mother, which I'm going to share with her this afternoon. So she hasn't heard it yet, but okay. I think she's going to appreciate that, because like you just said, sometimes mothers are only mothers to us and not anything else. And so as we experience these stories this afternoon, I guess we should share with our friends in the audience that not a content warning necessarily, but not just that not everybody's stories are flowers and roses. So maybe, give us an idea of the kinds of variety you've received over the years and what we might expect.
Oh dear. They're all over the place. I mean, the flowers and roses, those are the stories that bored me so much as an actor. I don't want to even play them. I want to play somebody who's a bit difficult, interesting. Let's find out. But that is also looking at people who have, they're all addictions, abuse, abortions, adoptions. There's all of the things of life. And this is the truth of life. And when we look at it as mom is the star, you're the bit player. Maybe you have lines and maybe you don't. But what was her journey in making decisions in her life, and how did it play out? And just that simple exercise, yes, it gives you insight into your own mother, but it also gives you insight into how the diversity of people's lives, how many people there are, and every single story is completely different. And yes, there's people who have disabilities, and there's people who get sick, and there's people who get better, and there's people who die too young, and there are ones that live are way, way, way long past their expiry date. And we get to see all of them. We're not judging ourselves anymore.
Gotcha. I love sort of the simplicity and the complexity at the same time.
It is.
Of that idea. I'm going to invite our guest readers in. Some of them are reading stories of their own mothers, and some of them are reading stories that have been written by other folks. So let's just welcome them in to our space. So first, I'll just get Eileen, who most of us know, who's a describer with VocalEye, Eileen Barrett, to just pop in and say hello. And Eileen, you're going to be sharing with us a story of your mother, I think. Just wait a moment for Eileen to pop up on our screen.
Sarah lost her. She was such a nice person, that Eileen.
Happy Mother's Day to Eileen. We lost you. Sorry.
Hello, Amy. Hello.
There we are.
Hello, everybody.
Awesome.
It's lovely to be here.
So, Eileen, you're going to share us a story about your mother today, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I was so honored to be asked by Marilyn years and years and years ago to be part of this project, and have been, it has been really close to my heart ever since that, in its many incarnations. So I'll be doing my mom's story today.
Awesome. Thank you for that generosity. Donna, also part of the VocalEye family. So many folks know Donna well as well. That's an odd sentence. Sorry about that. Donna, whose story are you reading this afternoon? Donna's on mute.
Donna's on mute.
Donna's on mute. She's moving around like she's got something to say,
There.
but she's on mute.
I was saying I can unmute myself. I had to be invited to do so.
Okay.
Because today many of you know me as Donna, the volunteer and event coordinator for VocalEye, but today I'm not in that capacity. So my powers of unmuting and things like that have been taken away from me. I've been stripped of my power.
Rudely stripped of your powers.
Yes, but I'm happy to be here today to read Sandra Crawford's story to you all.
Awesome.
And
thank you, Donna. And then we have Chief Janice George with us. Welcome.
There you are.
While I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And Marilyn, thank you for inviting me. I want to thank you for acknowledging my people in this territory as well. That was a beautiful acknowledgement. And I'm just really honored to be here. Yeah.
Honored to have you.
Can I
really
say
excited.
something, Amy?
Yes, absolutely.
Eileen was in our North Vancouver show playing another character. Donna was playing Sandra Crawford in the North Vancouver show. So she is very familiar with this material. Eileen has been part, and Janice's story was part of the North Vancouver show. But this is the first time that Janice is reading her story out loud herself.
It's
So
going to be a
very
real
good.
treat. And thank you for being so
Yeah.
generous in this space. I left you last, Marilyn, because you're going to be the first reader today.
Yes.
And so while I invite our other readers, Eileen and Donna and Chief Janice George, to just step aside. So Sarah, there's your cue to unspotlight them. And so we'll just have Marilyn spotlighted for the moment. And Marilyn, you can introduce to us whose story you're reading. And folks in the community, just to let you know, as we go through these 4 stories, we're going to have a Q&A after we share them all. And Marilyn's going to share with us the exciting workshop opportunity that's coming up for folks in the blind community, but other folks as well, if you're joining and you want to have an opportunity to get a part of this. So stick around for afterwards as we have that chat. So I'm going to back out of the frame. And Marilyn, I'm going to leave you in the spotlight to introduce the story you're going to share and to take it away. Thank
you. Thank you, Amy. I am reading the story that was written by Helen Whittle about her mother. Helen is was part of our North Vancouver group, and you will see why this seems to be a very appropriate story today. My mother, Lillian Mabel Walker, was born on September 16, 1909 in Stockport, England. In 1912, she immigrated to Canada with her mother, Lillian. Her father, Albert, had immigrated to Edmonton 2 years prior. As the First World War broke out, unbeknownst to my grandmother, Lillian, her husband, Albert, signed up and was sent from Edmonton to Montreal. At the time, men were not allowed to go to war without their wife's approval. Lillian complained to the highest authority and he had to return home. She felt strongly that had he gone to war, he would not have returned. You see, Lillian had what was known as second sight, which also became a fascinating attribute in my own mother's life. As the oldest child, Mom had to look after her 7 siblings. One day she ran off and refused. Lillian never strapped young Mabel, but from the tone of her voice, Mom was made to feel like a wretched child. Being very sensitive, Mom took everything to heart. She overheard her mother's friend say, "I will not look after that oldest child because she is always so naughty." Her mother told her that green-eyed people were no good. She grew up feeling that she was an ugly, green-eyed child, which affected her self-esteem all her life. I recall when she attended an elementary school sports day with me, she asked if I was ashamed that she looked so much older than the other mothers. In her 40s, her hair was white. In the 1930s, the Walker family moved to North Vancouver. settling into a house at the end of Adderley Street. The rent was $12.50 per month. Mom attended Lynn Valley School and Keith Lynn School. She excelled and dreamed of being a school teacher. Lillian, however, had other plans. She needed Mabel at home to help her with her younger siblings. So Mom quit school in grade 7. One day, 2 men from the school came to their house, and while listening from the bedroom, she heard them explain to her mother that she needed to be in school. They even offered financial aid. Lillian refused their offer, and Mom was devastated. It was one of her biggest regrets, not being able to finish school. She had an intuitive vision when she was 16. She saw herself married to a wealthy gentleman from a high-class family. He would be about 40 years old with brains. This vision would come to pass years later. When she was 31, she was offered a position as chambermaid at the Williams Lake Hotel. A friend had the job but had to turn it down, so asked if Mabel wanted it. Fate had stepped in, and it was here she met her future husband, Jack Vernon Darney. He worked as a telegraph lineman for the Dominion Government Service. She kept refusing his advances as she felt she was much too serious for frivolous things as going to a movie. Then he brought her a half-eaten box of chocolates, knowing she loved chocolates, even half-eaten. For some reason, this piqued her interest. As it turned out, he was 10 years older than her and a gentleman from a good upper-class family in England, just as she had seen intuitively. Jack proposed, and Mom accepted, though he was, as she put it, halfway drunk at the time. He swore to her that he would quit the drink, which he finally did after a few years with the help of her prayers and AA. Before officially tying the knot, she became pregnant. In those days, this was disgraceful, and other people's reactions always greatly affected her. She was always secretive about things and would never tell any of us the date of her marriage in case we figured out she had to get married. They did on February 25th, 1940, and Michael was born July 18, 1940. They moved to North Vancouver in 1942 to be near family. Over the next few years, Mom had 4 more children: Eileen in 1942, Grace in 1945, me, Helen, in 1946, and Heather in 1947. Mom worked outside the home doing housework and as a care aide, and handed over her little pay to my dad. He controlled the finances and did all the grocery shopping, cooking and clothes shopping, buying her house dresses every Christmas. She was dependent on him. And years later, when he passed, I had to teach her how to manage her finances and even how to grocery shop. My mother loved to write. She wrote plays, poems, and stories. During these busy years, she didn't have time to spend with her mother and always regretted it. In the 1950s, when Mom was so tied up with meetings, children, and working, she wrote a poem reflecting her feelings. It came to her one afternoon when she thought of seeing her mother Lillian standing in the doorway. Bowel cancer had taken Lillian in 1958. Mom vowed she would write her mother's life story, but never did. So she always remembered this poem. The Wisdom of Age. Age looks out from wisdom's door and ponders on the days of yore and wonders why youth cannot see how very peaceful life can be without the stress and strain and care of rushing here and rushing there to PTAs and garden clubs, and oh dear me, where are my gloves? No time for this, no time for that, no time to even have a chat. A cup of tea, a cozy nook, a warming fire, a pleasant book, a thoughtful deed, a cheering smile. These are the things that are worthwhile. But age must go and youth must come along the path which age has gone. And think when they too reach that wisdom door, how wise were they Who've Gone Before by Lillian Mabel Darney. In 1958, my older sister Eileen got pregnant, and keeping the family tradition, she kept it secret. In those days, it was still a disgrace to be pregnant out of wedlock. Crinolines were in style, and she was able to conceal her growing belly. At 17, she signed adoption papers to give the baby up as soon as it was born. When she was 8 months along, Eileen finally got the courage to tell Dad and Mum. Mum wanted to keep the baby, but the baby girl was given up for adoption, and no more was ever said in front of any of us. Years later, Mum intuitively knew she would meet her first grandchild, and she did, but their relationship was strained. Eventually, Dad let Mum in the kitchen, and she developed a love of cooking. In fact, she would enter her baking and canning in the Pacific National Exhibition Cultural Arts Show, and in 1972 and 1973 won the title Fair Lady. In 1974, she won Homemaker of the Show and was awarded an engraved silver tray. Her tattered cookbooks share a special place in my kitchen with splatters on her prize-winning recipes. Dad, not to be outdone, also entered the peony contest and won the title of Fair Gentleman. In 1975, it was a friendly rivalry between the two because they were both competitive in their cooking and canning skills. Dad passed away from a heart attack on June 9, 1977. Mum wasn't one to show her emotions. Even though she was devastated, she kept her grief inside. To keep busy, she traced Dad's history back to 1066 and then her own. Her biggest motivation and highest hope in this pursuit was finding out what happened to her grandmother after she had given birth to Lillian. Traveling to Scotland and France, she searched out names and places but never found a trace. She visited the Highland Games and brought back tartans for her granddaughter Nicole, who was a competitive Highland dancer. Mum never missed any of Nicole's competitions. Mum loved to drink real tea in an English china teacup and would read the tea leaves, if you had the pleasure of drinking tea with her. Her gift of intuition enthralled everyone. Over the years, my sisters Heather and Eileen would take her to the Merritt Rodeo, and she would read tea leaves for all those who stood in line waiting for her predictions. She became a well-known psychic reader and learned to read tarot cards as well as horoscopes. She was fascinated by ghost stories and regaled anyone who would listen with stories about the haunted houses she had lived in. It was Mum who pointed out that the house my family and I still live in is haunted. We've had many strange happenings occur, and my daughter Natasha had many ghostly visits in her bedroom, especially after my mom passed. Mum's gift of second sight has passed down to me, and I do clairvoyant readings and distant readings as a certified medical intuitive. Whenever I tune into her gentle spirit, she is there for me. In the early 1980s, Mum began to lose her sight. The diagnosis was macular degeneration. She had peripheral vision, but could not make out faces or read the books she loved. A man from the CNIB came to teach her how to use a white cane. I went with the two of them along 2nd Street and down Chesterfield. When he left, she said, "Oh, to heck with that cane. I'm not going to be blind." The cane was put away, and Mum never used it or focused any attention on her diminishing sight. She trusted and believed in her second sight to get her through her days, never thinking she could be harmed by not being able to see. In 1990, someone knocked on her door and she assumed it was Michael, her grandson. She invited him in. He helped her open a can of soup for lunch, and then, after they had eaten, asked her for money. Mum gave him her last few dollars and off he went. She did not find out until later that she had entertained a robber who had stolen from many of the seniors in the building. Police told her that she had been lucky the man had not harmed her. She knew intuitively that he was not there to hurt her. A few days later, when she was at the 7-Eleven store on 3rd and Chesterfield, a young man stepped up to the till and bought her a 649 lottery ticket. She knew it was him by the sound of his voice. The lottery ticket won $10. She felt this was the robber's way of thanking her for being kind to him. Mother's Day morning, 1992. Mom was getting ready for church and fell while putting on her dress. She fractured her hip and had to have a hip replacement. Afterwards, she refused to use a walker, saying she was not old enough yet for such a thing. Her health slowly deteriorated, and she was eventually diagnosed with congestive heart failure. In the last few months of her life, as she became weaker, my son Shane would carry her up and down our stairs when she came to visit. After spending 3 weeks in Lionsgate Hospital, Mom's wish was to go home. As everyone else made arrangements for her move to Evergreen Extended Care, I knew that this wasn't what she wanted. I sat with her that evening and in a shift of light saw the face of her departed sister Annie transpose on her face. Annie had come to take her home. Mom passed peacefully the next morning, April 4th, 1994. She will be forever remembered and loved by all her family.
Very nice, Marilyn. And thank you for doing the story, really bringing the story to life. I know that that when we get to the Q&A, we'll invite the writer of the story into the space to maybe share some thoughts about that. But I think it's a really lovely reminder that a life has moments of laughter and levity, and then moments of tragedy and pain, and so this format, this biography, this linear format that you've developed is really a great way of I guess laying that out sort of step by step so that you see the ebbs and flows of a human life.
And you'll also see that 2,000 words, which is about 3.5 pages. That story was 2,000 words. It was actually 1950. Helen, you got a few more, you can put a few more words in there if you want. All the stories that you'll hear today are 2,000 words. There's a lot of information can go in there. And they're good stories.
Well, thank you, Marilyn, for reading the story. And I'm excited for you to share with us during the Q&A more about your process of the workshop and how some of us can get involved if we would like to. And I would certainly encourage anybody to, but of course, our folks in the blind community who are interested in learning how to write in this way. So Eileen, will welcome you back. And I'm thrilled to hear what this, I mean, I'm thrilled about all the stories, but because I know you so well, I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about you and where you come from through telling your mother's story. So I'm going to exit from the scene and allow you to introduce the story and then share it with us.
I just can't help thinking all these moms would just be in stitches, just thinking of all the technology that we're dealing with in order to bring their stories to life. So this is the story of Elizabeth Howison, otherwise known as Betty, who turned into Betty Barrett. Elizabeth Howison, Betty, was born in Deadwater, England on October 17th, 1927. She was born a twin and had a brother, Donald George, who died at the age of 6 weeks. On his birth certificate, it claimed failure to thrive. I think my mother always felt guilty for being the strong one. Her parents met while they were in service to a captain of the Gordon Highlanders, a regiment her father Robert also served. Robert was from Glasgow, and her mother Jean was a cook housekeeper from Inverness in the north. Although they were posted to England and my mother was born there, she was a Scot through and through. When Jean became pregnant, she and Robert were strongly encouraged to get married by Jean's brothers. They did when she was 8 months pregnant. My mother didn't know until she was in her 50s how far along her mother had been. That upset her. Jean died of a brain tumor when my mother was 7 in 1935. Betty had no negative memories of her mother. She has a sweet one about being in a garden with her and her mother teaching her which flowers were Michaelmas daisies. She also remembered helping her to roll out pastry. She remembered that when her mother was close to death, she visited her in a darkened room. When her mother died, Betty wore a black Alice in Wonderland hairband with a bow. An armband was not considered suitable for a 7-year-old child. Betty went north to her maternal grandmother's home in Inverness for a few months, and then was sent to her father's mother in Glasgow while her father was stationed in Gibraltar. When her father remarried in 1937, Betty went to live with him and his new wife, Susie, until her half-sister, Jessie, was born. She remembered a basin of blood under the bed and going out all on her own to buy baby clothes for her wee sister. It was not a very nice part of town, and when she went back to her Glasgow granny's, she was bathed for some sort of infestation. Glasgow granny was not pleased. Betty's maternal grandmother was Catholic. Her paternal grandmother was Protestant. Glasgow granny was a woman who'd already had a hard life. Her husband had been killed falling off a telephone pole while he was quite young, leaving her to raise a family of 8 children. She really didn't want to raise my mother, but even more so, she did not want her to be raised a Catholic. My mother's Aunt Queenie, her mother's elder sister, had 3 boys, a baker husband, would have adored a girl, and lived in the fresh air of the Black Isle in the Highlands, close to Mum's Inverness granny. That wasn't to be, however. To this day, religion runs strongly in Glasgow. Even the city's 2 famous rival soccer teams are divided firmly down those lines. If you are Catholic, you support Celtic, and if Protestant, the Rangers. So, my mother went to live with her Glasgow granny. Her Uncle Hugh also lived there. He liked Betty far too much, and as she grew up, became very possessive. She was evacuated the day the Second World War broke out to Ballachulish on the train with her little gas mask. Her father was immediately called up. Betty's father died at Dunkirk at the beginning of the war. She remembered later going into the knife drawer in her grandmother's home and chancing upon a buff-colored envelope with the words, "I have been wounded," in her father's handwriting, stuffed into the back of the drawer. When she was 12, she went to live with her Inverness granny. As she described, it was as though going back to a cherished memory that had been taken away. She stayed there until she was 14. Then she was evacuated for the second time in 1942 to Aberfeldy. She stayed with a Mrs. Edwards for 14 months. It wasn't home, but it was pleasant, and Mrs. Edwards was kind. Another evacuee, a girl named Isa, became her close friend. They slept in a single bed with an orange crate each for their belongings, and in their room there was a desk with a secret compartment. My mother was a survivor who always looked on the bright side of things. She said, "I probably would not have had the opportunity to visit those towns if I hadn't been evacuated." It certainly helped to secure her remarkable ability to get along anywhere. At 17, when the war ended, she got a job in the GPO, that's the post office and telephone service, as an operator. In 1948, she met Joseph Barrett, a young technician. He had taken out several of the operators already, but found Ginger, as she was known, to be the friendliest. She was impressed that for their first date, Joe asked her to the Scottish Symphony. They had to hide the fact that he was Catholic. When this was discovered at home, there was hell to pay. When they started courting, rationing was still in effect. Joe would save up his sweet rations to buy a tiny box of chocolates for them to share at the pictures. On one of these occasions, Joe and Betty were followed to the pictures by her Uncle Hugh, who sat behind them and harangued Betty for most of the night when she arrived home. She fell in love with Joe and all the Barretts. A typical Glasgow family of 6 brothers, sisters, and 2 parents in a 2-bedroom apartment, they had one curious status symbol: an indoor bathroom. It was heaven for Betty to be surrounded by so many siblings, all vying for the bathroom and for the last treacle scone, and she found a lifelong friend in Joe's younger sister, Lillian. In 1950, she attended nursing school at Staub Hill Hospital. Joe would help her up over the gate of the students' residence when they would return too late from an evening out. My mother would have made a wonderful nurse, with her gift of compassion and the ability to draw out anyone's story. She had very interesting stories about working on the abortion ward, where she cared for many prostitutes, among her other patients. But times were difficult, and she left nursing to care for her Inverness granny. Upon first meeting Joe on the doorstep of her home, Highland Granny opened her arms and wrapped him up in them. No scheming was needed to gain acceptance to this side of the family. When they got engaged in 1951, Joe already had the urge to emigrate. Betty took little convincing. After all, being with Joe was a big adventure. She would have gone anywhere with him. After the war, there was a scheme where young British citizens could apply for a one-way passage to one of the countries considered to be in the Commonwealth. Shortly after they got married at St. Mary's Church in 1953, my mom and dad applied for New Zealand and for Canada. For New Zealand, you had to be single. You had to have a job lined up upon your arrival. For my mother, this was no problem. She was going to transfer to a nursing hospital there. They both had to lie to pretend that they were not married. This was a bit of a task at my mother's interview because she could not lie. I think my father sailed through with flying colors because he always was a good storyteller. Betty was accepted twice for New Zealand, but they waited for Joe. When they were both accepted for immigration to Canada, they changed plans and they headed for Toronto. My mother crossed the Atlantic several weeks after my father. He, finding passage on a Greek freighter, pitched and heaved his way, throwing up to the new country. My mother, by good luck, made her crossing on the Empress of Scotland, where there were on-deck games, good food, reclining deck chairs, and sustaining broth for the seasick, provided by attractive stewards. Life in Canada was a big adventure. There was no rationing. There was no ruling class, working class divide. It all felt so new. They were in heaven. They both became as passionate Canadians as they were passionate Scots. When my father came home from a visit to the West Coast, he declared Vancouver to be the most beautiful place he had ever seen. They packed up my sister Frances, my brother Michael, and me, and we moved to BC. With my father in a new job at Lenkert Electric and the last of their children in school, my mother got herself a job at the Hudson's Bay store in the newly opened Lougheed Mall, Ladies' Shoes. Betty would bake cakes every Friday, payday, take them to work, where she and her sales lady pals would pile them up amidst the shoe boxes in the back room and eat them between customers, pealing with laughter. When Lenkirk Electric downsized and pulled all their jobs back to the US, my father lost his. My mother's salary became our only source of income, while my father pounded the streets driving a cab, long shoring, or short shoring, as he joked because he was 5 feet 3 inches tall, and radio freelancing. It was a stressful time. My mother would often come home from work exhausted. I remember one night in particular. She came home after a late closing and a missed bus to find the house a mess, dishes undone, TV on, my brother, sister, and I screaming at each other. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. She was completely unrecognizable as she shouted at us all, smacked my brother, and took off out the back door, coat half on. When she returned a half hour later, it was only because they'd put me in a loony bin if anyone found out she was leaving. Another half hour later, she calmed down, begging for forgiveness. I don't know which part of that night was worse. She must have felt so alone. My father secured a job at the Labor Relations Board of BC. My mother was, by this time, a permanent fixture at the shoe department. She racked up a slew of customer commendation awards and had many devoted customers who would only be fitted by her when they came to the store. She could always be relied upon to find last-minute gifts for the wives of hapless men who wandered into the store on Christmas Eve and threw themselves on her mercy, although she would keep a slipper in one hand and she would imagine striking them about the head with it for their insensitivity and their laziness. Shortly before my parents retired, my sister and her new baby returned from Toronto. My mother did not know she was going to become a grandmother until my sister was 8 months pregnant. My mother and my niece shared a very close bond. Eowyn and her mom lived with my parents the first year of their life. Eowyn is strong-willed, a prodigious dance talent. My mother was a great softie, but she was also at birth the strong one. My mother and father spent many of their retirement years traveling. We joked about it being difficult to get hold of them because they were always off exploring somewhere. I was actually proud of them finally taking time for themselves. When I made my first forays back into theater after my children were born, my mother was enormously supportive. She would look after Matthew and Garnet throughout the rehearsal period and then come to the show when it opened. Whether I was in a wee period costume, her preference, or more often something weird, she was always there. My theater friends grew to adore her, sitting in the audience, clapping madly at the end of the show, hugging the actors afterwards as though they were all her children. She always claimed that I got my theatricality from my father, but it came as much from her. She buried herself in books. I believe it helped her to develop a keen imagination to get her through some pretty rough and loveless times in her younger years. She was a great Jane Austen fan. She always had well-worn copies of Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. She had very strong opinions about who should be allowed to portray the characters in those movies. She was a hopeless romantic who loved a good cry at a three-hanky picture. She could also burst into infectious, uncontrollable laughter, what she called going off on a wee hate-me thing. Throughout her life, people sought her out as a sympathetic listener and a supportive friend. She supported my father through a 5-year journey with multi-systems atrophy. They took him from us on May 25th, 2006, my sister's 50th birthday. Day by day, she coped, holding on with everything she had to will him to health and another day, nursing, bullying, and loving him. Even when she called to tell me she had a wee bit of cancer, it didn't stop her putting my father's needs first. Perhaps that is what gave her the determination to survive the massive surgery, which took out her esophagus and half of her stomach. She returned home to Sechelt and recommenced her care of him until he died. Then she got on a plane to Kelowna to visit her best friend, and then a plane to Scotland to go to a family wedding. And then I got another phone call. The cancer had returned, metastasized in her brain, and was growing rapidly. Even with the prognosis of no hope for recovery, delivered by an oncologist with the personality of Eeyore, Mom took a big breath, told us all she'd had a very good life, and patted the doctor's knee. "Oh, I prefer it when you smile, doctor." She wanted to die in her bed, in the home in Sechelt she and my father loved so much. She wanted to see all her family and friends and sort us all out before she went. Even in her final weeks, she would greet every home help and palliative care nurse with a smile and a hug, asking them if they were well and did they need a snack or a cup of tea. She left us on January 7th, 2007. I miss her every day. And the memories she has left me, images and pictures of my mother which dance in my head and fill my heart and senses. There she is, in the hug my son's arms wrap around me, in the warmth of the many sweaters she made me. They grow bigger with every washing. Oh, wrap up, wee girl. In the smells of the tea that wafts over me when I open my kitchen cupboard, and of pine salt. Wednesday was cleaning day in our house. And the smell of baking. Oh, the baking. Those wonderful, squishy, cream-filled things. And many, many wee treats to soothe hurt feelings, sore knees, or just because, oh, let's have a wee treat. And in the smile I feel welling up inside me when I hear a Scottish accent. Her laughter and her generosity touched so many lives. And although she has gone, she will always be, strangely, a survivor and a strong one.
Oh, thank you, Eileen. You got me going there a little bit. Thank you for sharing the story. It's obviously very touching to you, and it was very touching for me.
All these stories, they're all such, you know.
It's gonna be that kind of day, and as I listen to people talk about their mothers through these stories, and we've had 2 mothers now we've seen a life and a passing of mothers, and don't know what's next to come, but I think it reminds me to be grateful for my own.
Yeah.
So thank you for the reminder.
My pleasure.
Okay. Whew. Take a breath, Amy. Time to take a breath. Okay, friends. Thank you, Eileen, for sharing with beautiful story, beautifully written. And I love the introductions of the Scottish accent because I could listen to that accent all day long. One of my favorites to listen to. So anytime I find a movie where there's a Scottish actor, And I always know the difference between somebody who's genuinely Scottish and somebody who's pretending to put on the accent, because I suck at accents. So, but thank you so much for sharing the story. And we'll look forward to talking to you more about it during the Q&A.
Okay.
All right, friends, we're going to bring up Donna Soares. Donna, my friend, where are you? I know you're not far in the Zoom room. It's not like we have to travel really far to find each other. How are you this afternoon, this evening, close to where you are?
Yes, almost evening. I'm doing well, thank you, Eileen. That story. Because when I did the show with Eileen, she wasn't reading. She didn't share her own mother story, so that's the first time I've heard that. So, my heart.
Yep, right from the heart. Well, Donna, I'm gonna like back out of this frame altogether and let you introduce the story that you're gonna tell, and leave you to it, my friend. I'm really excited to hear this.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I am joining you today from Niagara on the Lake. That's why I'm a few hours ahead of time. So Niagara on the Lake, which is the traditional territory of the neutral nation, the Mississauga and the Haudenosaunee. And I am so happy to share Mary's story with you today. Mary is the mom of Sandra Crawford Bliss. My mother's story is more than overcoming the challenge of cancer and living with a disability. It is an example of the astonishing triumph of the human spirit over adversity. My mom, Mary Kwan, never had what people would call an easy life. Her parents moved to Canada from China during World War II. My grandmother was pregnant, and Mary became their passport baby when she was born here in 1942. My grandparents had met in China, become business partners, and eventually husband and wife. They owned and operated a hotel in Vancouver on East Hastings, AKA Skid Row, frequented by prostitutes and drug addicts. My mom and her little sister Louise were placed in the care of nannies, receiving visits from their mother only once a month. Their last nanny kept them sitting in front of the stove and fed them rice and hot water. My mom showed her determination and strength when, at the age of 7, she took her little sister and ran away from the nanny. Unfortunately, the only place they had to run to was to their parents and life inside the hotel. My father was angry with her and wanted to send her to China. Her father was angry with her and wanted to send her to China. Instead, for the next 2 years, anytime she was not at school, Mom spent working as a maid in the hotel, cleaning toilets, scrubbing floors, doing laundry, and maintaining 65 rooms with her sister and parents. My mom and her sister slept, ate, and did their homework in one room. When my mom was 9, my mother's father shipped her to Hong Kong to the care of his first wife. He wanted her to learn Chinese and the Chinese culture. However, his first wife hated my grandmother, his second wife in Vancouver, and was not enthusiastic about rearing her daughter. My mom was treated like a stranger in the home, sleeping in the servants' quarters. She told me that she was a slave. After 4 bleak years in Hong Kong, it was with great relief that a family crisis resulted in her return to Vancouver. The province of BC questioned my grandparents on their family allowance checks, wanting proof that they had 2 children. At age 13, my mom was sent back to Vancouver. She was happy to be reunited with her sister and mother. When my mom was 16, my grandmother gave her her very first birthday party. She felt so special in her long black skirt and high heels. At this party, she met Pat Crawford, who became her sweetheart, her first love. Pat's family did not have much money, and he could barely afford a present for my mom. He told me that at her party, he was so nervous, he accidentally tipped over an ashtray, shattering it when it hit the ground. My grandfather was not impressed. Within a couple of months, my mom and dad decided to go steady. She wore his ring around her neck, feeling so proud. With my dad, she could take her mind away from her family and home. My mom didn't like the tradition in Chinese culture of treating women as second class, and she never felt that way with my dad. My grandfather did not approve of my dad. My dad is Caucasian, and since mom was of Chinese descent, this was a big issue for a lot of people, especially their families. When my dad proposed marriage and my mother accepted, my grandfather disowned my mom and returned to Hong Kong, leaving my grandmother, my mom, and my aunt to run the hotel. It was sold soon after. In 1964, at age 22, my mom married her sweetheart from Britannia High School, my dad, Pat. The following year, my mom faced a health challenge that shaped the rest of her life. One day, she had a sudden pain down her leg and was taken to hospital. They believed she had a pinched nerve, and something happened in the emergency spinal cord operation that led her to being paralyzed from the waist down. They said she had a 15% chance of walking again. My grandmother said it was my mom's fault that she had become disabled, and now her husband would surely leave her. Of course, he did not. My mom was adamant that my mom not live the life of an invalid. He said, "Together, we will overcome this." For the next 4 years, it was hospital, therapy, and rehabilitation. My dad's devotion was unwavering. He was there daily after work. He would spend the weekends keeping her company, helping, supporting, and encouraging her to try just a little more each day. Through incredible determination and perseverance at GF Strong Rehabilitation Center, she slowly gained the use of some of her muscles. Bit by bit, she gained movement in her legs. She learned to swing her hips in order to get her stiff legs to walk. She told people, "Part of who I am today is because Pat was there with total commitment and patience. It was tough love. I think he also had an invisible whip in his hand." Her recovery was somewhat delayed by the unexpected but joyful news that she was pregnant. They had been told they had a 15% chance of ever having children, and having no feeling below her waist, Mom didn't know for 6 months that she had beaten the odds. On January 2nd, 1968, after months in hospital and with a cheering medical team, she was born. My mom and dad were ecstatic. She was perfect. They named her Tracy Louise Crawford, AKA TLC, my sister. After the birth of a healthy daughter, my mom continued her rehabilitation and improved sufficiently to walk with a cane. On July 17th, 1970, they were blessed again with another little girl. They named me Sandra Marie Crawford because of my gorgeous strawberry blonde hair. Those were my mom's words, by the way. My Chinese grandmother, or Po Po, came to live with us for a short time. After she learned to trust my dad, she loved him. Non-Chinese people are called Lo Fan, and my grandmother called my dad No Fun Lo Fan, her few words in English. She and mom would be in the kitchen all the time, cooking and talking. My mom and dad raised their children with no outside help. Mom's words. Right from the beginning, our 2 daughters were intuitively sensitive. They knew their mom had a disability, and they were not in any way demanding of attention. Pat and I had an easy time raising them. As an adult, I have a fantastic mother-daughter relationship with them. I cannot find the words to describe the love and devotion that they have for Pat and me. They are the joy that enables us to weather all challenges. Without their love, our life would not be complete. Once my sister and I were both in school, my mom started work at Scotiabank and volunteered with the BC Paraplegic Association. When the Rick Hansen's Man in Motion campaign started, she found full-time work there. She became good friends with Rick, and he gave her a red racing wheelchair. This led to employment with the BC Housing Management Commission, where she worked for the next 15 years. Once a week, we'd go to Chinatown for dinner, my sister and I holding each of mom's arms as my dad drove around the block looking for parking. On Friday nights, we would go to my mom's cousin's house and play mahjong, smoking and drinking until very late at night. My mother loved to argue, just for the sake of it, and so do I. She made me look up attitude in the dictionary. She demanded that everyone do their best and was not above poking you with her cane if she thought you were shirking. The greatest joys in my mom's life were her grandchildren. On May 4th, 1992, her youngest daughter, Sandy, me, gave birth to their grandson, Brandon Patrick Crawford. From day one, this child brought so much joy and happiness to her life. Brandon and my mom had a unique bond and, I swear, could read each other's minds. They would laugh together without jokes, play games endlessly. Today, Brandon is 29 years old. He has my mom's spirit. They are still connected, never breaking their bond. In Mom's words. What I did not know about unconditional love, I've learned from Brandon. There is never a day that goes by that he doesn't say, I love you, Grandma. I would reply, I love you too. He would then say, I love you more. That one phrase touches the depths of my soul and warms my heart. In August 1998, their grandparent status increased with the addition of my stepchildren, Rachel and Robert. Mom accepted them fully as family, playing chopstick games with them and encouraging them to have fun. Where many would have floundered, my mom found strength and resolve through her hardships as a child and from her disability. She believed that her disability assisted her in becoming a better person, more caring and compassionate. Her grace and determination in facing the obstacles in her life with such a positive attitude inspired her friends. My mom never complained or wanted to be treated differently. She even resolved her relationship with my grandparents and was able to forgive them for her bleak childhood, knowing that they had done the best that they were able to. It was during this time that she reassessed her life. She had many unanswered questions like, who am I? Why is life so physically difficult? There has to be more, a reason, a purpose, a meaning. She was on a mission to find some answers. In her search, she found comfort in the words of psychology, philosophy, and metaphysics. The more my mom read on these subjects, the more excited and curious she became. Her mission led her to discover her spirituality, to realize she was more than just a body, that she also had a soul. The discovery of this new faith gave her strength, courage, determination, and endurance. All this knowledge served a purpose when, in February 2001, Mom was again challenged with a health problem. A biopsy confirmed that she had stage 3 ovarian cancer. Mom was offered the opportunity to participate in a clinical study to treat her tumor with a new approach. Mom accepted the offer, as she felt her participation in this study might benefit other women in the future. She underwent a set of chemotherapy treatments that significantly shrank her tumor and then had surgery to remove it on May 31st, 2001. Over the course of the next 5.5 years, she had continual chemo and radiation treatments and 4 major surgeries. In May of 2006, my mom decided to discontinue further treatment and allow her body to take its own course. After all the years of not having control over her body, she decided it was her turn to make a decision and be in control. She had a living celebration of life with all of her close friends and family in attendance. During this time, she wrote 99% of the story, much of which I have edited into the past tense. My mom is the strongest, most beautiful, courageous, loving, admirable person I have ever known. She is my mentor, my hero, and the wind beneath my wings. I am so proud to be a part of her. Mom passed away on October 16th, 2006, with her sister, my dad, my sister, me, and her grandchildren by her side. Many donations from family and friends have been donated to the Canadian Cancer Society in memory of my mom. We will forever miss her.
Very nice, Donna. Thanks for reading that, even though I know it's not your mother's story. Well, maybe one day I'll get to hear your mother's story, but I think you brought that story to life, and I know that Sandra's on the line with us, I think, so maybe invite her later to join in the Q&A. So thank you for sharing the story. We've got one more to share, friends, so I'm going to invite Chief Janice George into the fold, and there we go. Welcome. Really excited to have you here with all of our storytellers today. I'm going to back out of this frame and let you just introduce what you're going to share, because I believe you're sharing your mother's story today. Is that correct?
I am. Thank you.
Oh, all right, my friend, I am going to let myself excuse myself and give you all the space you need.
Thanks. I'm telling my mother's story, Molly Jacobs, and later Molly George. Molly Jacobs was born in 1940 in St. Paul's Hospital, Vancouver. She was the fourth of 9 children born to Lena and Alfred Jacobs. Through this family, Alfred was a hereditary chief from the Squamish Nation. Alfred was a longshoreman, and they mainly lived on Capilano Reserve in North Vancouver. Her mother had been taken out of residential school after a nun hit her. And so as a child, she was home to listen to the cultural teachings of the elders. She was given 4 ancestral names, signifying her as the keeper of many Squamish stories and traditions. Molly went to residential school in Kamloops, which she didn't much like, and finished grade 8 at St. Paul's School in North Vancouver. She couldn't go further unless she gave up her Indian status. Those were the rules and laws. Kids were punished for speaking Squamish, so English was the language everywhere, except with the old people. Molly was very athletic and loved softball. She was a very good pitcher, and she was cute. In 1955, she was crowned Miss North Shore. She was sponsored by Lionsgate Dry Cleaner, and my dad said one of the guys there had a crush on her. And if he hadn't come along, he'd say, if I hadn't come along, he'd say, you'd all be Chinese. We all thought about that. My dad was friends with her older brother. I don't know how or when they started dating, but she was married at 16 and I was born soon after in 1957. My father, Ross George, was the oldest son of the oldest son in the George family, and thus one of the hereditary chiefs, as well as occasionally, for many years, an elected councillor. He was a longshoreman, and we mostly lived on the Mission Reserve. In the next 10 years after me, Mom had 5 more girls. So we were Janice, that's me, Kim, Lisa, Cindy, Charlene, and Paula. We lived in a wartime house, which meant 6 girls, 2 parents, in a 2-bedroom, 600 square foot house with 1 bathroom. There were diapers hanging outside of our house most of the time, which Mom washed in an old wringer washer. My mom would kick all 6 of us out of the house so she could clean. We'd stand outside and peek in. She'd put on Sugar Pie Honey Bunch really loud and clean the house, dance around and put the house in order. Now I think of it, she was only about 25 years old. She and Dad loved softball, and Dad coached Mom's team in the Lynn Valley Women's League. A headline in the province newspaper said, "Good golly, Miss Molly, you sure can pitch." They trained me to be a catcher, and when I was 12, I joined my mom's team, which is a women's team, and she pitched to me. As my sisters reached 12, they joined the team too. So we had a team of Mom, her 6 daughters, my aunt, and my cousins. We were good. Mom was also a home run hitter. She could hit the ball right out of the park. We were so good, the league changed the rules saying people couldn't enter their own teams, meaning that we all got split up. We'd still get together and practice for prize money tournaments though. And every weekend through the summer, we'd play somewhere in the interior or around BC. Mom would cook all week, chicken and roasts and salads and pack coolers full of food. Then all we had to do was get there. We'd jump in the cars, the players, their husbands and families. We were probably about 40 of us. We'd maybe camp or take over a motel, and Mom would have every meal for the weekend all ready. She had it all budgeted out of our winnings, the food, the motel, the gas. She could pull people together. She taught us too, so we could make a meal for 150 with a few hours notice. She loved to cook. When I was in grade 7 going to Queen Mary's School, the teacher told us that we, the First Nations Squamish people, had come over here over the Bering Sea from China. I was shocked. I went home and I said, "Did you know?" And my mother was blown away. She said, "Well, you know what? They can say whatever they want." She got my dad, and they sat down and said, "We are Squamish people, and the Squamish people have always been here. We did not come from anywhere else. Our history tells us we were created here." That has always been a strong teaching. In 1970, when Paula was 6, my mom went back to school and got her ECE diploma. Then she went to work at Squamish Nation Daycare on Esplanade. With half the kids who were Squamish and half weren't, she loved those kids, taught them Squamish words and songs, and cooked for them every day. Sometimes we complained that they got better food than us. One time the daycare lost its funding for a while, and Mom just kept on going in every day to look after the kids without pay. After a few weeks, it all got sorted out and the money came back, but those kids were cared for and never missed a meal. Mom was a health food nut before it was invented. She wouldn't have any processed food in the house, cooked everything from scratch. So we were jealous of other kids who got macaroni and cheese and bologna sandwiches. She taught us how to cook. My sisters learned so well. They had a catering business when they were older. My grandmother said, "You girls are good cooks, like your mother." In 1972, we moved into one of those condos on 5th when they were brand new, 4 bedrooms, 2 baths. My mom was in heaven. But on a Friday night, when the 6 of us girls were getting ready to go out, 2 bathrooms still weren't enough. Dad would run up and down the stairs trying to get into one of the bathrooms, and one of us would have to get out. Being the oldest, I was the trailblazer in our family and moved out to marry at 18. My parents thought I was too young, but I was determined at 21. At 21, I had a baby boy, the first boy in the family. The marriage didn't last, and soon my son and I were back living with my mom and dad. My mom wished I had found a way to work it out, but didn't say anything to me. She didn't need to. She just looked disappointed. Then I got gallstones, and after the operation, my mom took over the raising of my son. In 1981, my parents built a house in Waywicombe Reserve, which is in Brackendale, near the town of Squamish. And Dad and Mom, my son and my 2 youngest sisters, Charlene and Paula, moved there. My sisters and I had an apartment in North Van. My mother told my aunt they're living on popcorn and tea, and she'd bring us care packages of meat and groceries. "Take care of your sisters," they would tell me. "No one else will." On October 28th, 1981, Mom and Dad, Charlene and Paula, and my 4-year-old son came into town to celebrate my parents' 25th wedding anniversary. They had a nice dinner at a Japanese restaurant and then came to our place. My son asked if I could come home with them, and my mom said, "No, your mom has to find a job." It was raining hard and it was dark. They didn't see that the bridge over M Creek on the Squamish Highway had washed out. Their car went over the edge. Paula survived, but everyone else, my mom, my dad, my sister, Charlene, and my son Ross died. I was 23. My mother was only 41. Everyone knew what had happened. Wherever I went, people knew. They'd see me coming and the light would go out of their eyes. No one could hold a space for this tragedy. It was too big. I felt like I was supposed to carry my whole broken down hearted community through this grief, a grief that had happened to me and my family. I ran all over the place. Sometime later, I don't know how long, I was in California living anonymously in my grief. For 3 nights in a row, I dreamt of my mother. I knew she had come to tell me to go home, so I did the next day. My grandmother said, "When you lose a loved one, you need to give up something that is unwholesome, and you will never have a problem with that bad thing again." So I gave up drinking alcohol. The only way to walk on the path the Creator had put me on was with an open heart and a clear mind. I realized that to thrive, not just survive, I needed to walk on the right path, and that if I did that, the ancestors would show up and help me carry my burden. My grandmother also said, lead by example. People would come and say to me, "I lost my son and I didn't think I was going to make it, but I would see you and know that, yes, I can make it because you made it. Now that I'm older, I understand part of my purpose in my community is to help people, whoever I can. This is my mother's gift to me. My grief I now cherish as my gift in telling her story. Now I have back her life, not just how she died. It took a long time to get here. 30 years passed before I could tell this story out loud. Ocean.
Thank you so much for honoring your whole family and your culture by sharing that with us. I'm moved. Thank you for sharing that. Friends, this has been 4 very impactful stories tonight, very different, or tonight, this afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in and joining us. I'd love to just transition into inviting all of our storytellers and Marilyn back into the fold, to open it up to audience members who may have questions for folks about the writing process or anything. And then Marilyn's going to share with us how we can all sort of maybe get involved in creating our own mother's story. So I'm really excited to just get the conversation going. So first off, again, a big thank you to everybody for sharing. So Marilyn, Eileen, Donna, Chief Janice, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being vulnerable and open and giving of these stories this afternoon. So thank you so much for that. Marilyn, these aren't new stories to you. You've heard them before. Maybe just share with us why you felt that these stories were the ones to bring to this audience this afternoon.
Well, I did start this because Donna and Eileen are known to your audience. And then it was like, okay, well, there's some North Vancouver things there. So then I was looking at that. And of course, Eileen's story is about her mother was blind, and there we're the blind community. Here we are. But of course, it was she was also cited in other ways. And I thought, well, there's a theme on that one that we can have. And there's so many stories. I have not read them all or heard them all at once, and I'm just so astounded at how much wisdom, the wisdom of our mothers, has come through in each of these stories. And I think that would be the case in all of the stories that are told. When you tell someone's life from beginning to end, you put things together that you hadn't even considered before. And it is one of the things that people discover when they do write out their whole story, is that way that they traditionally usually think of their mom as that one thing or something like that. When they write the whole story, they get her whole life back. And that's one of the big gifts. But the wisdom of all of these women is just so wonderful.
And I too particularly love with both Janice and Eileen's stories, the strong sort of resonance of your mothers living in your hearts still, in the way that they keep giving to you in your lives, even though they're no longer physically here on the planet, but they're physically and spiritually here in our souls and our lives, and manifest in those that we love, which I think is a really beautiful sentiment and a really beautiful gift when folks are feeling like they are missing loved ones, right? Is to remember the gift and how they might manifest in our lives. So I appreciate that. And I know that we have a couple of guests with us as well who are welcome to chime their voices in. And folks, I would encourage you to use the raise your hand function if you could do so for engaging in conversation. It's just a little bit easier for this blind girl to keep track of the hands than it is the chat function, but I'll do my best. So please use the raise your hand function if you want to ask a question. I'm curious about, I already asked this of Eileen in the process of filling the gap when Marilyn had vanished from the Zoom air. So maybe I'll ask Janice if she feels comfortable sharing what the process of writing this story was like for you, whether you found that difficult or liberating or all of the above. But what was your process like?
Oh, for me, it was a bit difficult because, as I said, I mean, it kind of is still that way, that because it was such a huge loss, like a traumatic experience, that people don't really ask me to tell the story ever. So it was a little bit difficult at first, but really I felt so much better. It was the beginning of me being able to, repeat the story and, tell the story. And I feel like that's really helped me in my community be able to help other people, and especially moms. Like I said, to this day, moms who lose a child will come to me and actually say that to me, or, can you help me? I need help to get through this. And how did you get through it? And, what teachings did you depend on to get through it? So that was, an excellent thing that happened, being able to tell the story. And so that was great.
I would like to just jump in for a
Please,
little bit
Marilyn.
there, and that was that Janice was going to tell her story of her grandmother, and I said, well, what, and then we said, well, what about your mother? And so she told me the story, and what happened is that I wrote down what she said, and I've done this for a couple people already too, that they couldn't write it themselves. That required too much detachment on their part. And the story was too big. So they told me the story. I wrote down their words. Then then it was going back and forth on that. And that's something that other people can do. And I found that there's some, grandkids can interview grandma and write down what she says about her mother. And that it comes out that way. To write it down, it doesn't have to be that you just sit down. That's what I do at the workshop. Sit down, write it out as fast as you can. But if you can, get that with a buddy or someone in your family and tell the story. Get it out on paper, and then you can start moving the stories around that way. And it was a great story when Janice had her story told in North Vancouver. It was a great event.
Yeah, that's where I reside now as a settler, is in North Vancouver. And when Janice shared the story of the bridge, it was before I was born, but before before my knowledge of where I live. And so it was new information for me. And so I thank you for sharing that as part of your mother's story and your story, but also as a reference to remind us of the things that came before all of us, and the importance of those in our own histories, right? Our own histories of our neighborhoods and our the people around us that make up our community. So thank you for that. Marilyn, I would love for you to share with us a little bit about these workshops. So, now that we've opened up this new storytelling model to folks in the blind community, and I know that we have sighted supporters and allies here as well that may already be familiar with my mother's story, as they probably heard this information from you. But what is it that is the offer in these workshops? So share with us a little bit about how these workshops work, and then we'll put the offer out there.
Well, we've discussed it already. Is in the fall we'll have 4 workshops. Well, one workshop in 4 parts, once a week. And this is a new model that I'm trying out now with the people in Delta. But this is where people write their mother's story following our recipe. But we also have the opportunity of finding out all of the other information, exercises and things like that. And one of the things that I find so amazing about this thing of writing about your mother is that your memories of her are all over your brain, because she participated in so many different events in your life. And it's like, what I tell people is, your brain is like a hoarder's house. I mean, all the memories are just shoved in there. There's no organization. There's nothing going on there. So it's one of the things of this exercise is that you take out all of those little points and you put them in order, and you put them in chronological order. Now that will also organize all of your other memories around this story that you're going to tell. So we will, everybody will write their story and we will share them in this way. And you can see how different. And yet there was a box of chocolates that showed up all over the place. And there was all of these other little similarities that were going on in all of these stories that were taking place in different parts of the world.
The theme of the survivor,
Yeah.
Throughout one's life, the theme of the doer, the get her done kind of,
Yeah.
Strong women resonated really strongly. So for folks in the blind community and for others, if you're interested, we're going to post a link in the chat for a form that we filled out. So this is a form for folks who already know right now that they're interested in joining these workshops and writing their mother's story. Now, you can write the story just for yourself, or you can write the story with the anticipation of sharing it at a future event. So it could be a fundraising event that VocalEye hosts. It could be another for Mother's Day next year. But the idea is let's tell the stories of our mothers, our matriarchs in our lives. Document these stories. So the link's going to go in the chat. If you know that you're ready now to just commit to coming to the workshops and checking them out, you're welcome to fill that out at any time. And there will be an email that circulates after this event with a link to that. If you want to think about it for a couple of days, that's totally fine. And we'll keep, the VocalEye team will keep reminding our community of this as we go. But I'm really hoping that there will be folks from the blind community who want to tell stories of their mothers as well. Because I think I actually, when we were planning this event, I asked my mother if I could tell her story. And it's funny because my mother's like, why? Why would you want to tell? And I think that's probably what most mothers are going to say if they're still living and you have the opportunity to ask them is, why is that interesting to anybody? But I think what happens is once we put them in a collection, you start to see the similarities. And these moms seem to be all sort of in the same generation. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens when we get mothers from all sorts of different generations, right? And where the similarities are and where the differences are. So that's in the chat. I invite folks to check that out or to think on it. Totally up to you. The workshops are offered free to folks in the blind community. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I want to give space to Eileen. I want to give space to Donna to chat. We have a hand from Julia. So okay, let's just go right to our hand because we've got one. So Julia, why don't you ask your question or share your comment?
Hello.
Hello, Julia.
Marilyn, it's Julia. Hi.
Oh,
how
good.
are you?
Hi, Julia.
I'm here.
There you are. Good. You got here.
I did. So, okay. There we go. So, I've known about your project for a while, as you know, and I guess, there's just one little thing that's kind of held me back from doing it in the past. And although I loved my mother to death, it was a complicated relationship, and there were moments, there were times, and there was a decade or so where things were complicated, and it was really difficult to kind of come to terms with some of the choices that she made. So I was just wondering whether or not you had advice about how to deal with that when writing, if one of us decided to do this, and how to kind of, I know we're supposed to take ourselves out of the equation, but it's still hard. It's still kind of painful, right?
It is hard. It is hard, and it's hard for everyone. And I'm amazed that I keep wondering about things like that. Thank you, Julia, for asking this question, because we are in relationship with our mother all the time. One of the things the images that I have for people is that, and it's a very normal thing, is that when we are growing up, mother, when we are little, mother is God. She is everything. And our survival depends upon her looking after us, and that she is happy. But when we become teenagers, regardless of how she's behaving, which of course, being a human being, on Mother's Day, we have such an idealized vision of what a mother is supposed to be. No one can live up to that ideal vision. But when we get to be teenagers and into our 20s, we will it's natural that we all leave mom. We leave mom and dad, and we start creating our own lives and our own values and going in our own journey. And it's almost like we take everything about mom and dad and we put them in a box and we put it on a shelf, and we put a label on there that says, sweet or wonderful or, drunk or awful or nasty or whatever it is. And then we refer to the box on Mother's Day or birthdays and stuff because we are focused on our life. It takes a lot of effort to turn around and look back and take that box down off the shelf and just go, okay, I'm just going to look at this. And you open it up and it's got all of these, artifacts that a child collected. As an adult, you look at them and you go, why am I holding on to this? This is not important. That decade of, this is a story. This is not praise, just praise for the mother. It's a story, and stories are about struggle. And they're about overcoming things, and they are about where was life hard. And to look at your mother's life in terms of what was her story, what's the movie where she's the star, you, Julia, sorry about this, are just going to be one little part. And that thing of not being able to talk, which God knows we know. We are all in some kind of relationship with our mother in that way. It takes up a sentence. It takes up a sentence in the story. And that's humbling, but it's also gratifying because then you get over it. You get through it. You work through it. And you see the full story of your mother's life rather than this small thing, which is ultimately a small thing that is still sticking in your heart. You write down a sentence and we didn't talk. There you go. That's it. And then you get to write all the other stuff too. And you're free to write all of that other stuff. Anybody has writer's block, try this. It's like taking the cork out of a big cask of wine. If you get this story out, you can start writing a whole lot of other things. Thanks,
Wow.
Julia.
Thanks for the
Yeah.
question, Julia.
Thank you. That was great.
It feels to me like there's opportunity for some real closure in some ways, some catharsis, some reminders, and maybe some awakenings of things that we didn't want to revisit. But you're absolutely right about the idea of revisiting this stuff. I mean, even when I think about my own mother, and I'm not going to tell my own mother's story in this forum, but it's just like the moment I realized when I turned 35, I realized that when my mother was 35, she was going through a messy divorce. And I couldn't reconcile that as me as a 35-year-old thinking, because I was an unmarried person. And I was like, how could my mother have been going through a divorce at only 35? But as a 16-year-old, when it was happening, she was an old woman in my life, right? Like she was an old lady. And so we weren't connected the same way as you grow up as an adult and you start to look at what age you are and the milestones that your mother hit as a woman at the age that you're experiencing now. So I think that there's a lot of interesting exploration and maybe ways that we can find ourselves or relate to our mothers differently. Okay, so if we still have Sandra with us and Helen with us, they were the writers of two of the stories, one that Marilyn read and one that Donna read. I'd love it if they're welcome to share. They don't have to share, but if you would like to share, please raise your hand because we'd be interested in knowing what your process was like in writing your mother's story as well. So I will leave that invite open. And then I'll just turn to Donna because Donna, you were reading Sandra's mother's story. And I wonder from a reader's perspective, whether there are things in the story that resonated with you or whether you felt like there was this huge pressure to do the story, air quotes, justice or bring it to life. What's the process for reading a story that is not your mother's story?
Yeah, there is a bit of, I guess, pressure I felt in starting it, just because you do meet. I met Sandra, and you see the love that her family still has for her mom, and so you want to honor that, and you want to be able to tell the story in a way that they find satisfying. And so there was pressure, but that family is so lovely, and they were just so grateful to see the story told. And as an actor, you know, I just have to remember that it is quite similar to what Marilyn was saying about writing your mom's story. It's like, it's not about me.
Not about you.
Like, I just have to get out of the way and share the story. And so yeah, and when you're playing real people, you know, there's always that pressure of there's not the artistic license, maybe, that if it's a fictional character, so there's that pressure. But yeah, I was just really appreciative, having not written my mom's story and having thought about it and never done it. I was just really appreciative of having a story to share, having Sandra's story.
You're reading my mind, Donna, because I was going to ask you if you had written your mother's story, and since you've volunteered already that you haven't, do you feel like that's something you want to do now? Or are you still sort of like, when the time is right, it'll make itself known? Or how do you feel about that process?
My mom, I have interviewed her for various projects before, and she's just always like, I have no dreams. I have no aspirations. I just sort of like go from day to day. Like, there's nothing interesting about me. And there's actually, you know, when I think about, okay, if I just sort of chronologically lay out her story, there's actually so much I don't know. I don't know that I would have very many words to fill those 2,000 words. So yeah, I don't know.
That's what you say. That's your excuse. Come on. You start writing them down, you got lots of stories. And that's what they'll be. You put one memory down, another one comes up. Put another one down, another one comes up. It's the stuff that you haven't even, because you haven't looked at it. It's the stuff that you heard while you were washing the dishes. And it's like, and maybe there's a memory that, you know, really, you know that that's going to be in the story. Okay, I'm going to have at the time that, you know, there was the canoe. And, you know, that's a big one. But then there's all those other things of like, well, what did happen, you know, in 1974? What was that? Everybody's talking about. That becomes a very, very good specific question to ask your mother, rather than saying, you know, your hopes and dreams and passions and all of that stuff. Those questions that I asked you is like to go, no, what happened with your brother? Why did you go there? Then you've got the start of a very good conversation, because it's not talking about everything in the world. It's just one little thing. Or you're talking to somebody else, your mom's sister or someone else. If your mom has passed away, there's other people to talk to. And just like having a very particular question is much more complimentary to your mom than just, you know, tell me about your life, because she doesn't know what you're going to say. She
Right.
is also on the other side of these conversations where you didn't get along. She's thinking that you're going to say all the bad things that you ever thought about her, which is what she's been thinking in her own head. Our mothers are not different than us. In the middle of the night, all of us are going, oh man, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. But this is going to start real conversations.
Any of you that have, I mean, like Eileen, I wonder, you know, how you would feel if either of your sons wrote your story to the like, would you be open to that experience, or are you feeling how Marilyn just described?
Oh, I think I would find it very amusing. I think I would love to see what they would have to say, because they're both very different personalities. So once again, it's just all you can do is write from your own perspective and what your own take in it is. So I think I would find it really interesting. Janice, what do you think? What if your kids wrote about you? Do you think that would be a bunch of different stories from depending on their different perspectives?
My daughter, yeah, I think it would be amazing to see what she thinks from what we talk about now and what she gets out of it, and you know, what she was thinking in those teenage years when I felt like I wasn't going to make it through her teenage years. Yeah.
And then you know what you might discover too, again, as I think about the stories that I just heard the two of you reflect on, is, you know, because if, you know, Janice, if your daughter writes about your story, what you shared about your mother is a part of your story. And so that will resurface again. And the same with Eileen, you know, where were you when your mother died, from their, you know, from their memories, which is, oh gosh, if you think about the lineage, if everybody, you know, if everybody in a family just kept writing their mother's story, that there's always this section of overlap between the grandmother and the mother, and then the grandmother and the mother, and the, you know, like there's always going to be this part where they might have witnessed some of these moments in your life as you were witnessing them from you know, experiencing them with your own mothers. Yeah. And I can see that in like my mother's now 96, just talked to her this morning. And so I see this progression in my own family. It's like, okay, what does my mother say about my grandmother? And then what do I look at my mother and go, you're kind of like that. You know, you won't own up to it in this moment, but yeah, that's kind of you too. So that's an interesting thing. And maybe I'll have to convince my mother to write her mother's story while I write my mother's story. And then I guess I better get cracking on having a couple of kids so they can write my story at some point. But
well, as I recall, when this project first started, we did actually have just that. There was one of our elder actors who had written her mom's story, and then when we would do the presentation, she would be sitting next to her daughter who had written her story. So
that was Mary Phillips and Louise Phillips. Yeah.
Yeah. So Louise would be telling the story about her mom, who was sitting there telling her mother's story. So it was quite wonderful.
It's amazing when you can see things like we've had discussions about PTSD, people who lived through the wars in various countries and stuff like that. And when you realize that, you know, PTSD is not just about soldiers, it's also about, you know, women as well. And that you can see that intergenerational trauma when you start talking about it, and you see things being repeated over and over again in every family. Mitch Albom is an author. He wrote the Tuesdays with Morrie, and he wrote a book about his mother. And he said, you know, there's a story about everything. You know, where the picture on the wall is about the scar on your forehead, but your mother's stories are where yours begin. Her stories are the matrix in your brain. They're the first things that you heard when you were a little kid about how life works. And even if you didn't believe them or don't remember them, they are, everything that you've learned since then has fit into that grid in your head about how the world works. And then you have to, you know, it takes you some time to go, that doesn't, you know, my mother hates Russians. I don't have to hate Russians. You know, that's her story. This is my story. And whatever it is on those, we come from a place of oral traditions. All of us are telling these stories. And unless we value them and consider them to be important enough to write down, because my parents told me all these stories and I didn't remember any of it, because I remember television stories. I remember sitcoms. I remember like the most useless information ever. And I don't remember what the relationship of all of these people in my own family has been. Now I can cite things back to different places of those histories.
It's a wonderful moment, Marilyn, to share with us all about that. And I just, you know, again, from the two in our space today that have written stories about their own mothers. I don't know. I'll start with Janice, if you'd like to share. What would you say to somebody like Julia, who's like, I'm kind of right on the edge, you know, do it, or, you know, I'm not sure if I should do it. Any words of advice about your experience and how you would encourage others to just take the plunge?
Oh yeah, it's amazing work for yourself. It's a healer too. You can, talk about things, you think about things even for yourself that happened in your family that you could actually work through. And I think it's a real great legacy to leave for your children, grandchildren, that one day they're going to look at it we have to, I guess, well, because I work in museums as well, think about 50 years from now, 75 years from now, or, you know, that you're actually leaving something for them to, a legacy. Yeah, I think that's.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's a real gift you can leave for your mother and for your family. Eileen, what about yourself? Any words of encouragement?
Yeah, and I think do it because, well, in my own personal situation, my mom was alive in the first draft, so it was wonderful to be able to get those conversations and that new information from her point of view. Then the first pass I gave to her and handed to her, I wondered if she would mind me sharing this stuff about, you know, abuse in her family and all that kind of stuff. And she didn't bat an eye at any of that because, you know, it was the truth. And she told me that. What she got really upset about was that I had got the name of the boat that she came over on wrong. So it was little tiny things like, no, that was the Empress of Scotland. Like, you know, that was the Pride of the Fleet kind of thing. Oh, okay, sure. Well, that's an easy fix. I could do that. So it really made me laugh. It was an opportunity to spend time almost forcing her to talk about herself, which she didn't really want to do, but it was just so lovely to almost, force is a wrong verb, but just to be able to celebrate, no, this is your story, so you get to have your say in it, and I'm just the writer. And then so that then when she did die, it was a beautiful piece to have, to be able then to share with people at the celebration of her life, to say, I don't know if you knew about this, or blah, 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 or those friends who were in the store with her when, you know, they were there. So it was nice to be able to just say thank you to them, and them to come up to me and say, there are things you will never know about your mother because I know them, and you know, they're my things. And I thought, what a gift you've just given me. So just to be able to share, you know, I think share these stories around really does open up conversations for friends as well as family. So yeah.
Do you ever feel, you know, one of the things Marilyn said at the top was that, like, you only get 2,000 words, so you have to pick and choose what moments you're going to write about.
No, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. So I don't know, Janice, what your experience was.
But
don't worry about that to begin with. Just write it, and then you can figure out which of those 2,000 words you're going to use.
But I guess my question is would you write another version of your mother's story with choosing different moments, or
all the time? All the time. I mean, that it's always a draft. No matter when you write it, it's always a draft. If you wrote like when you were talking about, you know, if your mom is like 55 and going through something, and then you're writing the story, this is, you know, from her perspective, what I think now. And then you're writing it when she's 75 and she's in a totally different place. Well, you could just put that, you know, all that stuff about when she was 55 into, you know, a sentence. Right. You know, it's taking up all of it's always a draft that you are writing.
A living document.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I love that.
And I think I've written about 7 drafts of my mother's story, and my mother rewrote it twice because she wanted to make sure it was right, because I didn't have the names in the right places and stuff. She thought it was one of the an interesting thing, though. She thought that she didn't know why I was telling these stories in this thing of her official, you know, this official thing. And I'm saying, this is not the definitive story of your life. It's just me now writing, you know, the things that I remember. And it turned out, after a lot of conversation, she had to check with my sisters as to, why do you think that she's saying that? And they would say, I think it's a compliment. Really? And what we got into was that the things that I admired about my mother were the things that she didn't like about herself. And so she, in that first thing, she thought that she was very uncomfortable because it wasn't in this official presentation that she wanted to give to the world of who she was. And I said, well, I don't like officially generated people. I like real people. And you're a very, very, you know, it was like her sense of humor. You know, it was her, you know, all of these things. We had a wonderful conversation out of that. And when she passed away, there was nothing much to say because we'd already had all of that conversation.
Right. Well, I think, we should leave it at that, friends, with wishing
Yes,
everybody a
very quiet on the Q&A part
I
here.
think it's folks are just digesting
Yep.
things, and going through, their own reflection process, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we do have a draw. Since it's Mother's Day, we thought we'd send out a gift package to Murchie's Tea for those of you who are eligible. You have to still be on the line to receive the draw, and you have to identify as a member of the blind and partially sighted community. So, Marilyn, I'm going to ask if you would like to participate in the draw. In fact, I know you're going to anyways.
I'm waiting.
Yeah. And I think maybe just before we do the draw, because I know once we do the draw, folks are going to feverishly run off. But I will just remind folks that this coming Wednesday night, which would be our traditional Wednesday night, that would be May the 12th, there will not be programming because we did this Wednesday, but we will be back on May the 19th for Who's Chinatown, which is a virtual tour from the Griffin Project here in North Vancouver. So join us again, friends, for the 19th of May. All right, Marilyn, my friend, I'm going to bring Sarah out. And she's got the names we've transitioned to a technical version of, instead of writing them on paper and pulling them out, it's a spreadsheet that gets randomly moved around, and when she hits the button, it pulls a name. So when you're ready, Marilyn, at any time, I want you to just yell out, "Your mother's story, my mother's story." Okay. And Sarah's going to hit that button, so I'll leave you to it.
Are you hitting the button?
Yes, I am ready whenever you are.
My mother's story.
Okay, let's see. We have Alexandra Steele.
Oh, good. She's already signed up for something.
And is she still on the line with us?
I do believe so.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Before everybody runs away, though, can I just mention that one thing, because I wanted to put the word out. If anybody has a story of their mother who died before they were 20, before the writer is 20, our next book is for people who lost their mothers at a very young age. And please, we would like to talk to you more about that, because we'd like to find out your story. If you would like to just mymothersstory.org.
mymothersstory.org. And Marilyn, if you'd like to talk, that's my mistake, because I had a note to talk about the book. But just as we had promised a timeline on this event today, if you want to share a little bit about the book, I'd be happy for you to share that in this moment.
Oh, in this moment, could I just bring Michelle Hahn up just for a second?
Yeah, we got Michelle
she's
on the
around
line
there. Okay, and there's Alexandra Steele that has there to get her Murchie's gift, I see.
Yeah, we'll connect with Alexandra offline and make sure that their gift gets sent to them.
Is Michelle still here?
I don't know.
Amy and Marilyn, I do not see Michelle on our list at the moment.
Okay.
At the moment. Okay.
Then it's up to you, Marilyn.
Then it's up to me. Okay. If your mother died before you were 20, we are compiling a book of men and women all over the world, of stories of people in those circumstances. The book is going to be called Gone Too Soon. And so we are looking for people to write the stories. If you go on our website, there's an archive there, and there is a place of Gone Too Soon. You can read other stories that have been written in that circumstance. And please come to the archive and read. There's people in all over the world who have written their stories. And the mothers live all over the world too.
Right. And that's all available on your website, where people can find archived stories, and those who write stories as part of this workshop could maybe find themselves on your website or in an upcoming book. So there's opportunity to be published as well if the workshop is something that's of interest to you. So thank you, Marilyn, for sharing all of that. I think it's a beautiful gift that you've given us today on Mother's Day. And as folks are leaving their posting in the chat, their thanks and their enjoyment of the event. And so I think, you can rest assured knowing that this project has reached the hearts of many. And I think that's again, it's a beautiful gift on this Mother's Day afternoon.
Thank you very much for calling us all in here. It's been a joy. It's just been a joy to hear these stories again.
Yes, thank you so much. And we won't be here. This won't be the last time we hear from you because you'll be running our workshops in September.
In
So
the fall, get ready.
that'll be some exciting times. With that, friends, I invite you to enjoy the rest of your Sunday. We're going to stick around for just some informal chat for folks who want to engage for another 15 minutes at the most or so.